On the eve of the Second World War, Lodz was the second largest city in Poland. Roughly one-third of the city's inhabitants were Jewish, some 233,000. On September 8, 1939, the Germans overran the city. Acts of violence against the Jews broke out immediately. Many Jews were arrested, abused, publicly humiliated, and conscripted to perform forced labor. In addition, the Germans published a series of decrees dismantling the foundations of the Jews' economic and social life in the city. On September 17th, the Soviet Union invaded Poland. In accordance with the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, Poland was divided between Germany and the Soviet Union. The western part, the Wartheland, was annexed to the Reich. On November 8th, Lodz was annexed to this area and was renamed Litzmannstadt. On May 1, 1940, the city's poorest streets were converted into the Jewish ghetto. 160,000 people now lived in an area of approximately 1.6 square miles, or 4 square kilometers. Most of the ghetto houses were dilapidated wooden buildings, each with a small number of apartments and lacking connections to facilities such as the sewage system, gas heating, or running water. Even before establishing the ghetto, the German authorities appointed a Judenrat, headed by Chaim Mordechai Rumkowski, who retained this position inside the ghetto. The greatest hardship in the ghetto was hunger. Unlike other ghettos, the Lodz Ghetto was hermetically sealed off from other parts of the city, and there was no way to smuggle in food. The Jews were completely dependent on the Germans for provisions, who intentionally provided only small amounts of goods. Overcrowding, hunger, and poor sanitary conditions in the ghetto led to diseases and epidemics. About 21% of the ghetto's inhabitants, some 44,000 Jews, died during its 4 years of existence. Many social, cultural, and aid activities took place in the ghetto. Soup kitchens were established, and self-help organizations and cultural institutions were founded. There were youth movements and educational activities, schools, lectures, and even libraries that were run clandestinely. Because this was the first ghetto from which Jews in Poland were sent to their deaths, and as it was sealed off and isolated, its inhabitants had no knowledge of plans to murder them and did not organize any resistance. In addition, Rumkowski's policies made establishing an underground all but impossible. For this reason, the youth movements did not transform into resistance movements, as had occurred in some other ghettos. The Jews in the ghetto were forced to support not only their own living expenses, but also the costs of the German ghetto administration, headed by Hans Bibov. Within a short time, Bibov converted the ghetto into a source of profit for himself and other Nazi functionaries by establishing factories in the ghetto, the so-called resorts. Within 1 year, 117 factories were established in the ghetto, which supplied most of the needs of the German military in the area until 1942, and produced profits of more than 350 million German marks over the course of the ghetto's existence. Rumkowski encouraged the resorts, believing their profitability would ensure the continued existence of the ghetto. Work at the resorts was grueling, but Rumkowski's relative freedom of action in internal matters created an illusion of normalcy. The Jews believed that, despite the difficulties, they would manage to persevere, and for this reason, they even sent young children to work. At the beginning of January, deportations began from the ghetto to the extermination camp of Chełmno. By May 1942, some 55,000 Jews were murdered on this site, using gas vans. The most dramatic deportation, the Sperre, took place in September 1942. Bibov informed Rumkowski of the deportation of 20,000 people aged 65 and over, as well as children under 10 and the sick, tasking him with producing the Jews for deportation. Rumkowski hoped to save as many people as possible in order to keep the ghetto functioning. In his famous speech, he said, "I must carry out this difficult and bloody operation. I must cut off limbs in order to save the body. I must take away children." On September 5, 1942, a strict curfew was imposed on the ghetto, and the Jewish police began deportation. On September 7th, the Germans marched into the ghetto as they were dissatisfied with the pace of the deportation. They forcibly took Jews, disregarding lists, documents, or the age of those chosen. During this forced deportation, which lasted a week, the Germans murdered hundreds of Jews and deported 15,685 others to Auschwitz, almost a third of them children under the age of 15. Most of those deported were between the ages of 16 and 55, that is, people who were of working age, and not as Rumkowski had promised. During 1942, a total of some 70,000 Jews were murdered in Chełmno. Over the course of 1943, discussions took place about the future of the ghetto. The SS demanded the ghetto be liquidated, while local authorities objected due to the significant profits it was producing. As a result, the ghetto continued to operate. Only in February 1944 did Himmler decide to liquidate the ghetto in stages. During the summer of that year, 2 mass deportations to Auschwitz took place. The Lodz Ghetto, that had survived longer than any other ghetto in Poland, was liquidated on August 2, 1944. Fewer than 1,000 Jews remained.